I'm not gonna lie, I'm so glad that January is finally over. It's one of those months that feels like it just has like a million days in it rather than 31. But as it's now officially finished, it's time for another monthly reading wrap up. I read 6 books in January and I actually gave 5 stars to 2 of them. So stick around as I tell you what they're about, what their rating is, and what I liked and disliked about them. And if you're new here, hi, welcome. I'm Katerina. It's lovely to see you here. I make new weekly videos chatting about books, and if that's your jam, why not subscribe? Also, if you're wondering what the hell is on my hand, I did my own henna and it just did not turn out that great, so don't look at my hand for the entire of this video. If I catch you looking at my hand, then you're blocked. Okay, so the very first book of the month I read was Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. So the author actually based this book off her own mother's real life experiences. And in the novel, we follow a young girl who is half white and half Cherokee. We then follow her throughout her entire adolescence as she grows up in a very rural but also racist Ohio in the mid 20th century. She's born into a family of 8 children, and her life is very heavily influenced by her father and their Cherokee heritage. It's heavy of themes in poverty, family secrets, and the impacts of trauma throughout generations. And starting 2025 on an incredible note, I rated this 5 stars. Firstly, as a woman of color who grew up in a white area, this book really much resonated with me. I felt like it very accurately depicted the alienation and anger that comes from being racially bullied as a child. And all the stuff that happened in the book was really heartbreaking to read. But what's interesting is that the main character actually has darker skin in comparison to her siblings. So it's eye-opening to see how people treat her in relation to her siblings, and despite them being related, how this then affects their other sibling relationships. The novel also very heavily focuses on her relationship with her dad, as they were incredibly close. And it was really beautiful to read such a close father-daughter bond. It actually made me really miss my dad when I was reading it. Also, the writing was just absolutely gorgeous. It was so lyrical. I'm not even joking. When I literally opened the book and read the first page, I was like, oh, this is going to be 5 stars. Tiffany McDaniel did not come to play. I also personally don't really know that much about Native American culture, which is something I actually really do want to learn more of. And to read this book by someone who is from Native American heritage, explain their history and their stories and their struggles, was something that was very saddening to hear, but also so beautiful. And this book was just incredible. Also, just a trigger warning, there is a lot of sexual abuse against women in the book. I have read reviews of people thinking it was over the top, but to be honest, I actually think this accurately depicts what happened to real women in history. And I think we need more books like this that actually explore the atrocities that certain groups like this have faced. Overall, just a beautiful and amazing book, and one that if you want a good cry at the end, definitely pick this up. The second book I read last month was also based on someone's life, and that's When Breath Becomes Air by kalanithi. This is a memoir written by a neurosurgeon who was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and we follow him throughout his life and medical career, from his quest as a student to understanding the meaning of life, to graduating as a practicing surgeon who was treating the dying, and then finally becoming a patient himself where he's grappling with his own mortality. It's obvious from that synopsis that this is an incredibly heavy book that deals with meaning, death, loss. But before I give this rating, I feel like I need to flag that it feels extremely weird giving a rating to a book about someone's end of life, as it's incredibly harrowing to read about someone's illness and sudden death. But I'm going to try and give a justification on my rating based on the narratives that were explored within the book. So I ended up rating this 3.5 stars. Starting off with things I liked, it goes without saying that this is a very moving and powerful book. I couldn't even begin to imagine the intensity and complexity of emotions that the author was feeling during this period of his life. And I also found it extremely brave to write a book about this, especially when he knew he had limited time left. I also admire the fact that he was able to talk about death in such a matter-of-fact way. I think in Western societies, it's a very taboo topic and it's just never really discussed because it makes people uncomfortable. And he also shedded light on aspects of illness that I'd never really thought about, such as how his life felt very frozen when everybody else's was moving on around him, as well as delving into the mental complexities of having all these physical incapabilities. Plus, he also really puts in perspective of what people who have a full life ahead of them should really place value on. But based on all that, it obviously then feels criminal to not rate this 5 stars, but there were just certain things within the novel that didn't particularly sit well with me, especially regarding the book's overall messaging, which I think was likely unintentional. The author was obviously a hugely successful neurosurgeon and spent a lot of the book talking about his success in his studies and his career, but it felt very contradictory to other parts of the book where he was saying that family and friends should take precedent in his life, because he relays in depth the long hours he spent at the hospital, the unbelievable stress he endured and how he basically devoted his whole life to his job. And I don't know, it kind of felt like to me it was glorifying these toxic work cultures that are within medicine, which is slightly ironic because at one point he discusses how one of his colleagues actually committed suicide due to the amount of stress at work. Also, whilst it wasn't explicitly said, I wasn't a huge fan of this narrative essentially showcasing how his death was such a loss, purely due to the fact that he was very successful and smart, which, yes, it is heartbreaking to lose someone like that, but I feel like all death in any capacity, regardless of someone's achievements, is as equally as upsetting. Doesn't loss all have the same weight, regardless of someone's achievements in life? So yeah, this book felt very complicated to rate, and I really had to sit down for a while and think about why I was giving it this rating. Obviously, it's still an incredible book, and it is heartbreaking that this author has since passed away. I would actually still recommend this book for people to read. It's not massive as well, it's quite quick to get through. But I would just take all the other things I said just with a pinch of salt whilst you're reading it. So riding my wave of existential dread, the next book I picked up was The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is a 90s Japanese dystopian novel that's set on an island, where objects and all their associated meanings and memories to them begin to disappear. And the purge of the past is enforced by the authoritative memory police, and this governing body seeks to destroy the few people who are immune to forgetting. In this story, we actually follow a young novelist who is struggling to preserve her memories, whilst also hiding her editor who actually remembers everything. The novel explores themes of memory, obviously, identity, and resistance against oppressive regimes. And I gave this book 3 stars. I absolutely adore dystopian novels. I think they're such a cool way of warning against what the future could be. And I was obsessed with the premise of this book. Like, reading it felt very reminiscent of classical dystopian novels. It was very eerie how small things at first began to disappear, like bells and ribbons and perfumes. And then it got more scary when more important things started to vanish, like birds and fruit and novels. And what makes it even more haunting is that no explanation is given where these objects go or why they're disappearing. And I won't give spoilers of the bigger things that disappear, but it really makes you question your own identity and your perception of the world when objects start to go. And it makes you wonder, what's the limit? When are they going to stop? And really, what are these rulers hoping to achieve? However, I will be honest, I felt slightly let down by the end of the book because I felt as though the author only just scratched the surface in utilizing such a great concept, as I felt like the actual story just lacked substance. By the end of it, I had more questions than answers. And there was just so much missing information. There was no history included about the island or its people, or any explanation of why the government was doing this and what they were hoping to achieve. And the central purpose of the memory police was never explored, so it kind of felt like there was no stakes to actually get invested in. It does explore some really cool themes that make you properly think afterwards, but I feel like books like 1984 and Fahrenheit 541 have a bit more meat on the bones when it comes to dystopian totalitarian literature. After that book, I decided to flip genres, so the 4th book I read in January was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. The synopsis for this book is absolutely wild, so just stick with me. This is a satirical novel following a struggling author who is an American white woman, and she's jealous of her Chinese friend who, unlike her, is a successful author. One day her friend dies in a freak accident, and she ends up stealing one of her book manuscripts that's based on Asian experiences, and she publishes it under her own name, hoping to gain literary stardom. She does this because she's under the delusion that she is also as good of a writer, but her books don't sell well because she's not from a racial minority. And the whole novel is essentially this fast-paced chase of her not being caught for stealing her friend's work. I absolutely adored this, and this was the 2nd book I actually gave 5 stars to. I know, 2 5-star ratings in 1 month. Who is she? I was actually initially skeptical about this book because, well, on one hand, I loved the author's other book called Babel, but when I read the synopsis of this book, the plot and the vibes just sounded so completely different. I was a bit like, oh, I'm not sure about this one. But I should have never doubted it because, oh my god, I legit read this in 1 sitting. I think this book actually blew my mind. The main character is written in a way where you're obviously meant to hate her because she just is so racist. And you're literally rooting for her downfall the entire way, which is crazy because I've never read a book like that before. How am I so attached to this book where I literally despise the main character, where I would literally throw fists if I saw her in real life? That is truly incredible writing to keep your audience so hooked on a main character who is so insufferable. It was so fast-paced, and I was literally rattling through it to find out what happened next. I mean, you can literally see from my sticky tabs in it that I absolutely adored this book and was just underlining so many sections in it. I was also screaming at the way the publishing industry and online book spaces were explored. There's a bit where the main character is reading about what people say about her online, which felt very similar to BookTube and Goodreads. And I was literally just reading it wait, is this play about us? Because it was really accurate, and honestly, it was really funny to read as someone who is in these spaces. And to be honest, I think this book is actually important for people to read because it also allows them to understand issues of race a bit better. And I think you'll particularly relate to it if you're a person of color working in some sort of creative sphere. At least it did for me anyway. But yeah, an incredible book, and one that I think is actually going to be one of my favorites for a long time. Continuing with absolutely insufferable main characters, the fifth book I read last month was Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And nothing's more fitting than reading depressing Russian literature in winter. So this novel is narrated by a man living underground in poverty, and the book is essentially a collection of his thoughts and musings. And the book is split into two parts. The first is when he's an older man and he's expressing his cynicism and discontent in society, along with his general ideas of philosophy and rationality. And he generally claims himself to be superior to others because he is aware of his own misery and irrationality. However, the second part of the book is recounting events from when he was younger, ultimately showcasing his inability to form meaningful connections and his withdrawal from society. It's overall an interesting critique of Russian society in the 19th century, and it's also a struggle between emotion and reason. And I gave this book 3.5 stars. One of the things I love about classical literature is how you can relate to characters that were written almost 200 years ago. And that is so grounding. Like, despite the passage of time and all these technological advancements, we're closer to past humans than we think. You know, we've experienced the same feelings and emotions as them. And even though this main character was an anti-hero, I couldn't help but relate to him on some of his takes. And I think it's because Dostoevsky wrote him to be so complex. He's introspective, delusional, analytical, hilarious, indecisive, and also sometimes a little bit crazy. Which honestly, depending on the day, are all things that I would describe myself. And by the end, you are just really frustrated with this guy, but you also can't help but admire him a little. I bet this is a good summary. On Goodreads, my review of this was, this book is for those who passionately argue with their shampoo bottles in the shower, but run away at the first sign of conflict in real life. Because this whole book is just him ranting at society and its people, and he's just kind of pathetic because he never actually carries out anything he says in real life. Which sort of brings me on to my frustrations with the book. It's a super short book anyway, but I felt like he was sometimes just coming across as a little bit annoying, which I get was most likely intentional because this is all part of his character, but as a reader, I was kind of rolling my eyes near the end. I think for me, this guy is just like a little bit too introspective. You know those people who just like overthink everything and are constantly caring about what other people think of them? And when you're hanging out with them, it just gets kind of draining. He's that person that I just want to turn to and be like, look, people don't care. Stop deeping everything. I think you guys are thinking about yourselves too much. I mean, it's still a good book and it's great because it's a short read, but I personally do prefer the author's other works of White Knights and Crime and Punishment a bit more. And finally, we are moving away from the classics and back to modern day. After the whole weird TikTok ban situation and just social media apps becoming ever more dystopian with their right-wing radicalization, I wanted to read a book about online spaces and just the dichotomy of the virtual world and real life. So the final book I read in January was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. The story follows a woman who basically gained internet fame through a social media post. And the novel is split into two parts. The first part is just exploring this online space, otherwise known as the portal, and just the messy and quick and overall fragmented nature of the internet. And then in the second half, she actually experiences a family tragedy. And it therefore forces her to re-examine her online existence in opposition of the brutal realities of real life. And I gave this book 4 stars. So when I actually first started reading this book, I hated it. It was so messy and abstract and weird, and I just couldn't get into it. And then I realized, oh, this is meant to resemble posts in a feed on a social media app. I'll show you what I mean, but it's basically broken into these like short, pithy paragraphs, which is meant to resemble like a Twitter feed where the content is so radically different from post to post. And then when I got this, I then really started to enjoy it. Because as someone who is so chronically online, it just made me realize how stupid the internet is. Like, do you ever try and explain a meme to someone who isn't on the internet and they just look at you like you're insane? Like, my brother isn't online whatsoever, and whenever I try to explain any sort of internet reference to him, he literally just looks at me and is like, what on earth are you talking about? And that's how it felt reading this entire book. Like, the content is just so reminiscent of discourses you see online. But because someone is telling you about them rather than you experiencing it yourself, it just comes across as whack, which was fun for me to read. I think if you're not online, you'll hate it, but given that you're watching me right now, I think you are probably quite online. online. And then the second half of the book was so powerful because it just had this entire message of when you're going through tough circumstances in real life, the internet and online spaces just don't really matter. Like when you're going through a tragedy, you're not going to be wasting your time and energy arguing with strangers online about trivial things. And honestly, I feel like everything going on at the moment with social media apps, this book was a literal reminder to go outside and touch some grass, like focus on the real world. Like Los Angeles was literally on fire earlier this month, which climate change had a big deal in. And the people that run these social media apps, these billionaires, are just wasting the resources we have on Earth and destroying the world we live in. I don't know, it felt very relevant for now, and that's I think why I enjoyed it even more. And to be honest, if you're someone who's just resonated with everything I've just said, I think that you'd really enjoy this book as well. And those are all the books I read in January. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? And if you haven't read these books, what books did you read last month? Let me know in the comments below. One of the things I actually want to do going forward in these monthly wrap-ups is actually telling you a little bit about my month personally. If you're not interested in seeing that, that's okay. You can click off now. But I kind of like it when I watch booktubers and they tell me about things that are actually happening in real life to them. I feel like I can just connect with them a bit better. So I'm going to give you like a quick minute rundown of my month. I'm not gonna lie, Januaries are not particularly it for me. I think it's because I've always just had such a nice time at home over Christmas with family and friends. And then when I come back down to London, the January blues just hit. And I'm just like, I cannot be arsed with anything. Like, I forget that I have to deal with my job and life and just being an adult in general. I also had just like so many work deadlines in January as well. So just going back to work has just felt like such a slog. And the past few weeks have been like really stressful. So I've been trying to like get all my work done. Also, my flatmate told me over Christmas that she was going to be moving out. So it's been really quite stressful trying to find someone to replace her. But I actually had flat viewings yesterday, so I'm hoping that I pick someone soon. I also caught up with a lot of friends last month, which was really fun. I went out for lots of dinners and drinks because, I'm not gonna lie, I gave up on dry Jan quite early due to my stress. I also weirdly found out that I was quite good at bowling and won a game, so that was cool. This is also super random, but I discovered the TV show Smallville and I am obsessed with it. I'm currently on season 6 and I actually cannot believe how in love I am with the show and Tom Welling, of course. It's just fantastic and it's literally been my comfort watch for this entire month. I also went to the cinema to see Baby Girl. I went with one of my best friends and it was so funny and excellent to watch. But yeah, there we have it. That was my January. If you like this video, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out. And if you're new here and you like this sort of content, why don't you subscribe? I make new videos every week talking about books. Feel free to also follow me on Goodreads where I update what I'm reading in real time, and feel free to also follow me on Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post about books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see what I've rated them out of 10 and also what they're about. And I will see you next week, where I will be ranking all the books I read in 2024 from worst to best. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye!